sitting in the sun in this dark audience, because this is the sun and there's one more on the left side. So it's my pleasure now. I'm Walter Klitz, for those who did not attend the session yesterday afternoon. I'm the director of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, posted in Tel Aviv. I've been there for 8 months, and I enjoy it, and I still enjoy it. And I'm happy to be in Tel Aviv from time to time. So I have the pleasure to lead you through the next session for 2 hours, Tolerance and Ethnic Diversity in Germany, in German Society. It's my pleasure to introduce our 3 speakers, and we are going to start with Professor Schoeps. Each speaker will have 30 minutes, so at the end you have 20 minutes, 30 more minutes for Q&A or for discussion. Professor Dr. Julius Schoeps is Emeritus Professor for German Jewish History at the University of Potsdam. He is the Director of the Moses Mendelssohn Center of European Jewish Studies in Potsdam. His main foci of research are German Jewish history and Zionism, migration research, modern anti-Semitism, and, to my surprise, art plunder during Nazi rule in Germany, which was a really hard political issue maybe 10, 15 years ago after the wall came down. Among his most recent books is a biography of David Friedlander and a family biography of the Mendelssohns. And if I'm well informed, you are just writing one more book about Moses Hess, Leon Pinsker. No, is this done?
It changed.
It changed. Okay, it changed. So he's writing a lot, and since the session after lunch is always the most difficult, because it will be our job here to make sure that you don't fall asleep. I want to tell you one funny story. When I went to North Korea, and some in the audience know already that I was in charge of the project of the Naumann Foundation in Korea for more than 5 years, and had the chance to travel to North Korea 22 times. And they showed me all the good things of socialism in North Korea. And this was my first or second trip, I had to go in the library, and they showed me more than 10,000 books. So the library was full of books of Kim Il-sung. And I raised the question. It was Kim Il-sung.
Same book or?
No, different books. And then they started, so this reminds me a little bit of your publications. I raised the question, how many books did he write? And then they said 10,500. 10,500 books. And then my answer, from time to time I cannot shut my mouth, and this is a problem I have. Yeah. So and then I said, oh, he is a very fast writer. This means at least 1 book a week. And then they didn't, they stopped arguing anymore. But anyway, I don't doubt your publications. Also, it's very common in Germany at the moment to doubt if somebody has written it or somebody else had written it. But I know him and I trust him. So the floor is yours, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, Germany's Jews in their manifold subgroups, if they could be experienced up to the early 1930s, had a comparatively clear idea about their own roots, their own tradition, and their own place in the middle of Europe. This had a lot to do with a self-consciousness which had matured over the centuries, and a minority history which was closely interconnected to the development of the German nation and its culture since the Enlightenment. Before 1933, the German Jews derived their self-image from their own religion and traditions on the one hand, and from the language and culture of the German majority society in the other. Not only a few felt such a close connection to their surroundings that they felt themselves not to be Jews in Germany, but rather German Jews, which makes a significant difference. German Jews. A German Jew, to put it succinctly, was someone who stood by their Jewish heritage, while at the same being at home in the German language and literature, someone who sought German and who was not significantly different in behavior and appearance from the others in the surrounding society. If a survey had been taken amongst the Jews before 1933, asking them how they defined themselves, there would have been a group response of uncomprehending shrugs. It is also likely that several names of German Jewish role models would be mentioned, certain to include the philosopher of the Enlightenment, Moses Mendelssohn, as well as the names of politicians such as Gabriel Risa and Johann Jacobi, of writers such as Ludwig Börne and Heinrich Heine, and most likely also those of renowned composers such as Giacomo Meyerbeer and Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. As we all know, the German Nazis destroyed the former dream of the German-Jewish symbiosis in the most brutal way possible. Although a few small communities formed shortly after the end of the war in 1945, which also represented some German Jews, the once flourishing German Jewry, associated with names such as Liebermann, Einstein, and Buber, had irretrievably disappeared from German soil. Even after the remarkable growth in the Jewish communities in Germany during the 90s of the last century, the consequence of Russian Jewish immigration, it seems to be very unlikely that the German Jewish legacy will be further built upon. Some of the new immigrants from the former Soviet Union, who today make up about 90% of the members in the local Jewish communities, are indeed interested in the German Jewish legacy. Yet this does not necessarily have anything to do with their own sense of identity. Many Eastern European Jews are familiar with great German minds such as Goethe, Heine, and Kant, but this is not necessarily the case with German Jewish greats such as Börne, Einstein, Meyerbeer, or Mendelssohn Bartholdy. And this is easy to understand. Why should the new Jews in Germany be forced to identify with a legacy that is much farther from theirs as that of Sholem Aleichem, Josef Brodsky, or Pasternak? Cultural Jewish continuity in Germany, and we should not try to kid ourselves here, cannot be artificially reconstructed even 65 years after the Shoah. However, one decisive question remains, and that is if the German Jewish legacy will remain of historical interest for future generations. This will in turn only be possible if the Jewish legacy proves to be able to be integrated into the common German cultural legacy. Will it be possible to have writers such as Börne, composers such as Mendelssohn Bartholdy, and philosophers such as Adorno or Horkheimer belong to the German cultural legacy in the public consciousness in the same way as their non-Jewish counterparts? Only when this legacy is not seen as something foreign, but recognized as something integral, will there be a chance for the German Jewish cultural tradition to continue to survive in Germany at last in a rudimentary form and be given its due respect. A sober accounting quickly leads to the conclusion that the nurturing of the German Jewish legacy will remain relevant on the German-speaking cultural sphere also in the future. It is illusory to suppose that this could happen somewhere else. Things had admitted seemed different, at least during the 1930s, when around 240,000 Jews fled Nazi Germany and settled all over the world, particularly in Palestine and in the United States and other countries, where at least for a while in certain places they were able to maintain something like a German Jewish milieu. At this time, people were still convinced that the German Jewish legacy had a realistic future also outside of the German-speaking world. The founders of the Leo Baeck Institute in New York, London, and Jerusalem thought at the time that the processing of German Jewish history could never happen in Germany, but would only be possible abroad. Let's take a look at the example of Palestine-Israel for a moment. Those 50,000 Yekes who were able to immigrate to Palestine and create a new home for themselves continued to lovingly maintain their own cultural legacy to a remarkable degree in salons, concert halls, newspapers, and lecture series. They did this and continue to do so today, as well as they can, albeit with the knowledge that the culture they grew up in and brought along is a dying culture. Still, at least the first generation of Jekes continued to adhere to their own culture. It was an inherent part of their own identity. Things developed in similar manner in the United States. Although the adaptation process for the Jews coming from Germany to the surrounding society proceeded much faster and was less problematic than in Palestine or later in Israel. Their German background often played just a lesser role as the US passport, which was issued after a time, resulted in those possessing it to consider themselves to be first and foremost American citizens and not exiled Germans or refugees. The memories of Germany and of their own background faded significantly faster here. Yet despite all this, the German Jewish cultural legacy could be soon felt in particularly prominent ways. This is true for the film industry in any case, but naturally for several renowned universities as well, where refugees from Germany transplanted entire scientific disciplines. In the 1930s, Renaissance research, for example, formerly at home in Germany, had found a safe harbor in the United States and experienced a new prime. Another significant example are the emigrated Jewish sociologists, including those from the Frankfurt School, who founded their own Institute for Social Research on the Columbia University in New York and had a crucial influence on the New School in New York. Reform Judaism in the United States also received a completely new influential impetus through the large German Jewish immigration wave in the 30s. The names Abraham Geiger and Leopold Zunz still mean something, and the music of Louis Lewandowski, well known up to date in many American synagogue communities, much more so than in present-day Germany. Nevertheless, we must speak of remnants of cultural islands and regional phenomena. An authentic, historically matured German Jewry was with the Mendelssohns, Oppenheims, Wolfsons, Wertheimers, a coherent tradition which unites German culture and enlightened, open-minded Judaism is as good as non-existent in Germany today. German Jewry was for all practical purposes completely obliterated by Hitler and the Shoah, and that which we call the German Jewish legacy has been struggling with the stigma of homelessness ever since. This can be cause for regret and for complaint, but nothing can change the facts that the German Jewish legacy no longer has a place to be attached to. There have been, without question, a few respectable attempts in the last decades to reclaim and to integrate the German Jewish cultural legacy insofar as this is possible and conceivable, at the very least into the common German cultural and historical consciousness. To illustrate this point, using two concrete examples, Ludwig Börne and Heinrich Heine are no longer the homeless journeymen, as they were disdainfully referred to by anti-Semites of all stripes in the past. Quite the opposite. The non-Jewish majority society has begun to re-examine their works or even to identify with them. In Düsseldorf, albeit only after a certain delay, they named their university after Heinrich Heine. It didn't stop there. There is now a Heinrich Heine Institute, several collected editions of his writings and letters, and a society with local chapters in different cities which carries his name. The city of Düsseldorf arranged for a memorial from the artist Bert Gersheim, named a boulevard after the poet, and every 2 years awards the Heinrich Heine Prize, which is granted in honor of the great son of the city. Heine has finally arrived in Düsseldorf. Something similar can be said for Ludwig Börne, who had been born in the ghetto of the city of Frankfurt. Here as well, they named a school after Börne downtown, and every year the Ludwig Börne Prize is awarded to a German-speaking political journalist in the Paulskirche. The speeches held on these occasions try to commemorate the other Germany, the democratic Germany, which had always existed, which is unfortunately all too often forgotten. Another example of the rediscovery and re-evaluation of the German Jewish cultural legacy is the composer Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. Indeed, Richard Wagner famously announced his scathing verdict on Mendelssohn Bartholdy, which led to, among other things, having Mendelssohn Bartholdy's works not being allowed to be performed during the Nazi period. Mendelssohn's romantic compositions are again enjoying a level of popularity after being banned by the Nazis. Today, the oratorios Paulus and Elias even belong to the standard repertoire of sacred music. There are also visible signs of progress in science, the media, and the memorial work concerning the rediscovery and maintenance of the German Jewish legacy. Since the end of the 1980s, there has been a whole series of research institutions which work in the field of the history of German Jewish or European Jewish relations. For example, in Duisburg, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Potsdam, and Leipzig. At the same time, a number of Jewish museums have opened, for example, in Frankfurt am Main, Munich, Augsburg, Halberstadt, Hohenems, Austria, Vienna, and especially in Berlin. The number of visitors to these museums is more than respectable. Sometimes memorial work and culture can be integrated into public everyday life in an utterly uncomplicated and yet effective way. Mention here should be made of the Stolpersteine, the so-called Stolpersteine, stumbling blocks by the Cologne artist Günther Demnig, which have the names of murdered German Jews and are laid into the street or sidewalk in front of their former homes all over in Germany. But let's not spend too much time in current local initiatives and projects which are trying to maintain the German Jewish legacy, at least in parts. What has been undertaken in this direction and is still being undertaken is indeed remarkable, but has more of a fragmentary character and is unfortunately not proceeding systematically, which is what would be necessary to anchor the legacy in the collective memory. Another shortcoming is that there is until now no systematic overview of what historical material on German Jewry exists and has been secured in Germany and abroad. What do I mean by this? I'm not talking about the construction of more research institutions and museums. There are enough of those. But most of all, the securing of relevant archives, bequests, estates, and papers of all kinds, which are privately or publicly owned somewhere in the world and are often unknown even to research. The Leo Baeck Institute in New York, with its branch offices in London and Jerusalem, has thankfully taken on this task in the last decades. Today, it has, however, proven to be a problem that a generation of refugees from Germany who had founded the Leo Baeck Institute are largely no longer present, and their descendants in the United States, England, and Israel increasingly have problems dealing and identifying with the German Jewish legacy handed down to them. Under these circumstances, what can even still be done? There is a vital need for a rapid stock-taking, which has also been recognized by the politicians. The Mendelssohn Center is currently working on a commission from the German government under the direction of Dr. Kotowski to create a handbook as well as the establishment of a data bank, which is to provide the first comprehensive overview of sources and studies on the German Jewish cultural legacy in the world. To provide a somewhat more concrete idea of what this is about, I would like to quickly include a few utterly practical examples from everyday existence of the historian. In the mid of the 90s, last century, the Arnold Schönberg archive was to be moved from Los Angeles to Europe. The University of Southern California apparently no longer had any use for it. At that time, Berlin and Vienna were competing to receive it. Both cities believed that they could make a legitimate claim to the archive. Vienna ultimately won. As founding director of the Jewish Museum of the city of Vienna, I was involved in the complicated negotiations at the time. On the one hand, the Schönberg family had to be convinced and their consent had to be granted. On the other, a workable acquisition concept needed to be developed. The decision was finally made in favor of Vienna, not least because the city agreed to make available prestigious premises for the collection and as a cherry on the top to create a Arnold Schönberg professorship. Berlin was simply unable to compete with this offer. The winning acquisition model, if I may call it that, in the Schönberg case, could certainly be transferred to and used in other cases. I'm thinking, for example, about the estate of the famous director Max Reinhardt, which is being stored at the University of Binghamton. It's a little university in the state of New York. It should be, I think, returned to where it really belongs, also either to Berlin or to Vienna. Naturally, these kinds of proposals demand the highest level of sensitivity. Complex sensibilities continue to exist, but it is at least worth a try. This also means having the necessary discussions and entering into negotiations. There are flexible possibilities can be taken into consideration. I'm referring to purchase, exchange, or the possible completion of a loan contract. Consideration should also be made of the situation of special archives, for example in Moscow, where the Rathenau estate, among others, and in particular the archives of the Zentralverein Deutscher Staatsbürger jüdischen Glaubens are located. The numerous Judaica objects which have an unmistakable connection to Germany and are yet scattered and being preserved all over the world should also be included in future considerations. The Judaica collections in the museums in Jerusalem, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and even in the comparatively small art museum in Raleigh in North Carolina include manuscripts, Torah crowns, Rimonim, and Besamim boxes. It would be nice to know how and through which most likely adventurous way they wound up there. The expert knows that many of the objects displayed in the case of these museums originally came from the German-speaking area. If these manuscripts, cult items, and objects from the everyday life of Jewish families can no longer be returned to the German-speaking area, which no one seriously expects, then the least which could be done would be to catalog them and save the results in a data bank. Not only the Judaica collections should be documented, but also the libraries that Jews from Germany took with them in exile to Palestine, South America, or the United States. A first attempt in this direction has been made by the staff of the Moses Mendelssohn Center to document the whereabouts of some of these libraries. The libraries from Walter Böhlich, Alex Bein, Ludwig Geiger, Ernst Simon, and other prominent Jews reconstructed in the Mendelssohn Center are therefore not only a mental bow before important minds, but also reflect a capital of German Jewish cultural history which has come to an end. It is a personal concern of mine to systematically record and document paintings and art objects which had once been the property of Jewish private collectors in Germany and are today, for the most part, scattered all over the world. It is unacceptable, but there are paintings hanging on the walls of established museums, that there are art objects being stored in their depots, when it is not clear how they even came to be in the museum's possession. the proof of provenance, which is not seen as a matter of course everywhere, should be made obligatory for all museums. That's my opinion. I would like to close with a rather curious yet significant episode. It once again makes it clear that we all must to secure the remains of the German Jewish legacy in Germany and abroad. In the beginning of the 90s, while we were preparing the exhibit Patterns of Jewish Life in the Gropiusbau in Berlin, we learned of a German Jewish married couple who had been able to save all their belongings and take them along into their emigration. The couple had been able to take with them their complete apartment furnishings, wallpaper, furniture, pictures, etc., as they fled Germany for the United States. In San Francisco, where the couple ultimately settled, they took an apartment and decorated it exactly the same way with the furniture they had brought along, standing it in the same place as it had been in Germany. It was a tangible attempt to retain an exact replica of a piece of their lost home. Our team was electrified, went to San Francisco, and visited the address given. Unfortunately, we no longer were able to meet the couple, as we learned they had recently died. The next shock came with the news that the apartment had been cleaned out a few weeks before our arrival, and the furnishings had all landed in the trash. Our hunt for a piece of past on German Jewish living culture, which had survived decades abroad, had come to an end. The case of the furnishings in San Francisco, which landed in the trash, is being repeated every day. It is up to us to stop the process of disappearing and forgetting. If we don't act, who else will? And if not now, then when? Thank you.